Hello, friends, and welcome to Club, the C Club podcast. My name is Jess, and I'm very excited today to bring you a conversation with Ohhshiny, the Metaverse community manager. Dive into the community and value found in Bored Ape Yacht Club. We talk about new brand models in Web3 that have a focus on niches and nuance, and about building reputation and the future social reputation could play in somebody's career and the overall importance in the economy moving forward. Really fascinating conversation with Ohhshiny, the Metaverse manager. Let's jump into it. Welcome. I appreciate you're here with us today.
Thank you, dude. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And it really feels like whatever we're doing on a daily basis, we're doing together, even though we don't spend a lot of time talking with each other. We don't spend a lot of time literally in each other's businesses, because we're both a part of this ecosystem where everyone that creates value adds more value to everyone else. It's just there's such a positivity in being able to come together and have conversations like this because I know the work you're doing will help me, the work I'm doing will help you, and together we'll be able to build this future metaverse into a better place than what our existing reality looks like.
Yeah, so I'm very much looking forward to those two worlds coming closer together, which I think they're doing on a daily basis, if it's not quite obvious yet. But maybe a great place for us to start before we jump into conversation is, how do you introduce yourself? What are you working on right now? Give us the short intro.
Yeah, so my name is Ohhshiny, the Metaverse manager. I've been in NFTs for about 4 years now, really as just a curious participant, and that's what I do on a daily basis. I am a curious participant. I go into communities. I try to really understand what makes them scale, what makes them special, and of course, how that then plays into the companies these communities sit on top of. And Really, the biggest difference between what I do in this Web3 space and what people do in the Web2 space is that when you're building a company in the Web2 space, you can observe everything that the community is doing, but it doesn't really actually factor into the overall health of the business. It's really not that important. In Web3, the community is the business. Your marketing is actually, how do I build my community? And by keeping that community happy, by allowing them to feel like they're owners, all of a sudden I can build a bigger business than I ever could have without them. And so the community just goes from being something that is an extra for a lot of these Web2 companies to being the most important thing in Web3, in my opinion, bar none, for anyone who's building a company. And so when I say that I'm the community manager of the metaverse, I like to think of myself in that more macro role where everyone that's doing something in the metaverse, that's doing something in this Web3 space, I would like to go in there and try to help them think about community in this new way. Because if you're building a business and you're not thinking about community in this new way where they're actually owners of your business, they're participants, they're sitting on the same side of the table with you. If you're not thinking about that, you're really not going to survive because there are going to be companies that come into the space after you or that are already here that are treating their community incredibly well, that are giving them back things, that are providing value to them every step of the way. And you're really going to get lost in the dust. I mean, people are just going to have a more clear value prop. And so there's nothing cooler to me than being able to participate in a community where the company actually just provides you value back. They love that you're there. You're not in oversight. And so being in this space is so much fun. Trying to be a community manager is the most fun thing possible because everyone is there collaborating, working on ways to actually contribute their time to the company and to each other. And that's really what I do on a daily basis. I hope that answers the question.
For sure. So, obviously I'm a big believer in the core thesis there of communities being the thing in Web3 where value flows up to, and it really changes the dynamic on how people, organizations try to create value. And I think, you've been pretty deeply involved in a number of communities that probably fit this bill that are really focused on giving ownership back, that have really been building amazing experiences. Most of them, I think, have NFTs related to them in some way.
Well, that's the big switch. That's really the big switch that's occurred, and when we talk about this Web 2 and Web 3 space, Being a community member means that I actually own a piece of what I'm involved in, and it's because of these NFTs that I'm now an owner. So I actually have a stake in what goes on with the company. It's like it's like actually being able to buy into a retail company instead of just buy. Like if Supreme, if your T-shirt actually gave you upside in the brand of Supreme as it grew and scaled, wouldn't that be incredible? And that's what's going on here every day. And so I'll just go into an example because I have a feeling that's where you were leading. There is a company called Bored Ape Yacht Club, which I've been a part of since its first day live out in the world, where they decided to do something that almost no one had ever even thought of before, which is not only are we going to let you buy this collectible that looks like an ape that you can use as your identity, we're actually also going to give you the IP rights to it. And so all of a sudden, what does that do? It makes me empowered to actually use it as a business, to use it as my identity. This, I own it. I own the rights to monetize it. No company would ever do that with their brand in the traditional world. Why would I give something away to a consumer? There's so much inherent risk on my business. That consumer doesn't know what we're trying to do, but it's completely changed in this new environment. That consumer is actually going to be the main provider of value to my brand. Isn't that an amazing way to reframe things? And so in Bored Ape Yacht Club, they decided we're actually going to let these consumers become participants. They get to own their IP. And immediately we saw people start to build companies around their own apes, wine companies, coffee companies, comic book companies, animated TV show companies, and more are still just coming out every day. And really being in that community from day one and seeing all these new ways that the founders decided to engage with their participants as opposed to being customers. So for instance, day one, the founders were in their own Discord. They didn't have some social media manager. The founders were in the Discord talking to people, wondering what their backgrounds were, who they were, what their interests were, because at the end of the day, for those people to actually add value, the founders need to understand who their buyers are. What's this company made of? Who are the people that are actually within this company? And so the more they got a handle on their buyers, the better they can sort of drive the North Star. Who are the people that are going to be helping this brand out along the way? And how do we all work together? And so immediately they started to tell people and empower them to build their own companies. They started to give grants, actual money to people that had ideas for their own apes to develop those ideas further. And they started to actually award certain members of the groups specific titles because they were being helpful. So maybe one person was the bartender of the group because they were the people that were always telling the jokes and they were serving up memes, let's say. And all of a sudden they had all these people that they started to reward immediately because those people were contributing positively to what the Bored Ape brand was. And they became an integral part of the Bored Ape brand. And Bored Apes Now, which has done hundreds of millions of dollars of volume in sales with just a few thousand people as their buyers, would not be the same if they did not take everyone that was a buyer and worked their asses off to make them feel like they were owners and participants. And Bored Apes has now been the example, the shining example for every other company in this space, where if I want to come in and I have an idea to sell to a would-be consumer, the idea actually is not going to take off unless I treat those people like Bored Apes, but actually even better than Bored Apes because I'm coming after them. And so I have to work even harder. And so the future is one that looks like, as a community member, you're actually valued more and more and more for your time. It's only going to get better for you as a community member. And that's why I feel like I have the best job in the world, because just being a community member is incredibly fun. I don't know how I'm going to be rewarded next by helping out these companies.
Whew, okay, so many things to dive into there. I guess I'm torn between this, like, wanting to go deeper into Bored Apes because I think it is such a great example, but also trying to think through like the sort of the evolution of this model, because Bored Apes is really it's a consumer focused product, if you will. Like the community is the product.
They're all consumer focused products now. The only thing that in the Web3 space, I mean, hardware aside, I was talking to a company the other day that's a Web3 banking company. That's not really traditionally a consumer focused product. Those founders spend 35% of their time, they've audited it, in their Discord, talking to their community. I mean, that would blow people's minds in the traditional world, but it makes perfect sense here because those consumers are the ones that are going to inform them of their new products. They're the ones that are going to give their brand value. They're the ones that are going to provide a moat around that brand because everything is transparent and out in the open. So there's nothing that that brand hides that they're doing better than some other brand other than taking care of their customers. And that starts as being someone who's very perceptive and building that customer base into a community.
I love this line of discussion because it's bringing up some uncertainty or lack of clarity in my mind as it relates to C Club. And so, I mean, let's just go there. I think something like Bored Apes, I agree that that all products are or all projects are consumer facing at some level, and yet at a certain level, like there's a degree of operations that go into running so many of these organizations. So I wonder from like your understanding of Bored Apes, or maybe more generally, there's a sort of sense of ownership that can be given through an NFT. There's a sense of ownership that can be stewarded through community management. How do you see that relating to sort of the core of these organizations? Like, is Bored Ape Yacht Club a DAO and a community that's sort of owned by the community in a true sense, where people can come in and do that work, or is there still like a distinction between sort of a core team that's serving the community and the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, no, I think about this a lot, and it has to do with the grandeur of the idea. It really has to do with the founders understanding if the idea is actually bigger than themselves or not. If the idea is very self contained, I'm starting, for instance, um, a food truck. And so I'm building my community to help fuel the sales of the food truck. Well, really, there's a lot of work the founders need to do there because the food truck can't be run by the community. There are certain standards they have to abide by. And also, it doesn't really help if the community has these incredible ideas for what the brand can do if they're completely outside the scope of the food truck, because that's really the business at the end of the day. With Bored Ape Yacht Club in particular, what they understood is that if you actually get a group of people that all believe in this piece of identity, and then they can leverage that piece of identity into however they feel it should be used. And so Bored Ape Yacht Club said, we're actually not going to be a food truck. We're not going to be a clothing company. What we're going to do is understand the people that like our graphics, the people that resonate with this identity, and we're actually going to help them. We're going to facilitate them to build out the things that they enjoy that are in line with the rest of the group and community, and we're going to leverage our IP to do the same thing. So instead of being a clothing company, they reached out to the hundreds and collaborated with the hundreds. And instead of being a festival, they reached out to a festival provider, and there's an upcoming festival in New York City that Bored Apes is going to be throwing. Now, the festival provider is throwing it. They're just leveraging their IP. And so Bored Ape Yacht Club is really, no one knows what the brand actually is. You wouldn't be able to put your finger on it. They don't have one central mission or ethos. What they do have is a community of like-minded people that they know if they actually support those people will end up making businesses that can all sort of relate and feed to each other. And along the way, they'll keep that North Star clear by reaching out and collaborating with brands that they think are really in line with that constituency.
So what comes up for me there is like, we look back over the last 10 or 20 years, Red Bull is a brand that has just done amazing things, leveraging sort of this new media, right? Like they went and did just amazing shows or venture type things, sponsored all sorts of athletes, were able to build huge brand equity because of it. But it's still very much using, Web 1, traditional media, and then Web 2 and, as sort of social media rolled out. What I hear here is like there's sort of like an expansion of that. And so looking at Bored Apes, or looking at this sort of like, it's almost like a community owned brand model rather than a community owned business or maybe even DAO, and that the idea it's almost about removing friction across the board. Well, as you're suggesting, it's even beyond removing friction. It's about like greasing those wheels so that those people who are empowered through ownership can go and create media, create experiences, create connections, free from the friction that would exist even in a traditional organization because of how the scale and potential that comes with doing that, especially given the fragmented media landscape that we live in right now, essentially means that like I mean, I guess the likelihood of anybody building a major brand like a Nike or a Red Bull outside of this model is probably very low.
Yeah, I mean, we're moving into a world where people continue to become more particular around their interests. And the the taste and style of people is siloed within more and more niches. And you see that in the social media platforms that represent the next generation, where you'll have very, very, very stark, specific groups of people that all follow certain fashion trends or that all follow certain media. Or that all think a certain way, and this idea of the generalized publication is dead, and so it's really hard for me to believe that there's going to be another generalized top-down brand. Instead, all these people have these very specific ideas and goals. And if you actually have the right sauce, you can facilitate them to build those things out. And you can capture that community by providing them support and by giving them value every step of the way. And maybe if you're just generalized enough, you can capture 5 or 6 of these communities that all sort of relate to each other. And that's how you can create some really big brand. But this idea of these big brands, to me, are really over, in the eyes of like this consumer who's no longer generalized. I for $10 can actually buy a ton of different fashion. I don't have to go to one place. I don't have to look the same as everyone else, and I can watch anything online. I can fit into whatever social group I want to fit into.
Do you see like I guess there's the adage of the business model of the internet is bundling and unbundling. Is this sort of like is this an unbundling or is this a rebundling that's happening with Bored Apes?
I think there's a general unbundling that's going on, and that unbundling is the consumer brand and all of the different creatives that exist within that consumer brand that actually create the product. So that's the packaging person, the designer for a clothing brand, or it's the musician and the album cover art person and the producer for a music company, and so many other people I'm not thinking about. But all of a sudden, all those people, actually the providers of value within a brand, are unbundling from that brand, and all of them are becoming autonomous. They're building brands around themselves. And so that, I think, is a general unbundling that's going on. Bored Ape Yacht Club is a reflection of that, because all 4 founders are not like people that are CEOs in the traditional sense that are running groups of creatives. They are creatives. There are 2 coders, there are 2 tech people, there are 2 creative people. That's what the team's made up of. They don't have a boss. In the traditional sense, they probably would, but they've been able to actually come together, build a brand around their own creation of value, each one of them, and then go directly to the consumer that is right for that. So I think that's a general unbundling. And then you have sort of a bundling in the micro level, because when you can unbundle everybody, and then there's no one voice that's saying, hey, the singer is the most important person in the music making process. It's not the songwriter, it's not the album cover art person, it's not the producer, it's not the mixer, it's the singer. Well, all of a sudden, when you unbundle all of those people, then all of them are free to collaborate with each other. All of them are free to build their own brands. And so there's this different weight distribution that is going on right now that's allowing these other creatives that have not been in the spotlight to actually say, oh, we can collaborate with each other. We don't have to be siloed off into this specific funnel where first it goes from me to the A&R, and then it goes to you, and then it goes to the music label, and then it goes back to that person. No, 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 no. And so then there's this bundling of all these talented individuals that are seeking each other out to create brands. So I think there's macro unbundling, micro bundling.
I love that. It's almost as if there's like this, the internet or networks generally speed up the transfers of data or information, and probably this bundling, unbundling is probably happening at the same time across multiple levels. I think that's actually one of the unique things that communities can do, right? If we have capital and distribution and the sense of belonging existing in these organizations, then there's this natural, there's enough incentive to come together and make together that can create a sort of connection and collaboration that might be more challenging to do just broadly out in the cold desert of the internet. I'm curious, beyond Bored Apes, like what other great examples of community-led, community-driven projects can you point to?
Well, I think something I can point to that's been happening recently is my good friend Farouk, who has just created a media entity called Rug Radio. But it's not just him that's created it, it's actually 6,000 people that's created it. And what the progression of the creation of Rug Radio was that Farouk and I went on to a Spaces one day, and he said, I think there's an opportunity to build a big media company here, to everyone that was in that Twitter Spaces, a few hundred people. And then he said, but actually, it's not just going to be me building it. We need everyone to build it. And implicit within that statement was the understanding that everyone that contributed to building it would also get value back. That's something unique to this new Web3 environment where there's that expectation that's already built in because everything is transparent. And so I know that I provided you value. And again, there are other people out there that are going to give me value back for the value I've provided. So if you don't, you're actually misplaced within the industry. And of course, a leader in the industry like Farouk, people can assume he's going to give value back. And so everyone just started to throw up ideas. Everyone just started to take the lead. I'll do a show on music, said one music producer. I'll do the graphics, said one graphic designer. And I'll start the Discord, said one Discord moderator. And so really, overnight, this media entity was built in this completely distributed fashion, where Farouk really was not even the leader per se. He was the voice. He was the gatherer, the glue. And overnight now, there are 6,000 people in this Discord. There are 4 different shows that are going on Twitter Spaces, all run by different people. And they're building out each one of these individual shows as brands in the broader Rug Radio ecosystem that everyone just created out of thin air, really. And it's just because collaboration is so seamless, because everyone knows that they're actually going to be exchanging value with each other, that they're not going to get lost, that they're not going to not be valued. All of these things allow for something like this Rug Radio idea to pop up. And similarly, I have this show called the Ohhshiny show that I do every single day that some people have come on and someone sent me the jingle that we use now every single morning, and people remix it and people do the graphic design work, and then they come into the community in the Discord or on Twitter, and they know that I value that tremendously, and every step of the way I can, I'll be able to reward them value back, because that's how you keep this value creation going. And it's just something that it blows my mind every single day that we exist in this new environment.
Those are 2 wonderful examples. I would love to drill down a little bit more on this value exchange, because I think there's sort of 2 levels to have this conversation at, and one of them is far more complicated than the other. So, and I'm very curious in your response to this. So, at one level, I think it's easy to say, hey, because of tokens, because of Web3, we're able to have this sort of collaborative environment where you'll be rewarded for the value you created. And I think at that high level, everybody in our world is going to be a big heck yes, right? This is exciting. And I think you can drive a lot of attention and interest from that. There's a next level, which is like the how. What are the mechanisms being used to reward these people? What does ownership look like? What does say look like? And I'm curious if you've maybe use an example of your show or others that you've seen where that transition from the high level, we're going here together, trust that we're going to do it together and you'll be rewarded for it, to the actual specifics of rewarding people. I'm looking at Farouk's most recent tweet here. It looks like doing a cool collaboration with FuckRender, creating a POAP that is available for people who they join. Like, these are great ways of sort of representing membership, but I'm curious as to like, where does the incentive hit the road where people are actually able to turn that social capital into maybe a financial asset or some sort of IRL value?
I mean, there's so much that is opaque at the moment. And I think that your question doesn't have an immediate answer. There is no way that someone can actually today exchange the work that, first off, there's no way to actually quantify something that doesn't have like very obvious metrics. And so social capital, it has so many different things that factor into it, that, and those things also change depending on the situation. And so when someone gives something of themselves, when they provide time, when they provide a service, when they leverage their reputation, all of those things, no, they actually won't be given back immediately in a one-to-one way. But I also think that it's reciprocated in the sense that that person knows what they're doing is unquantifiable, and that everyone will arrive on a different number. It's really that you can extrapolate out into the future and know that if something happens where this value is quantified, then it will be distributed in a way that hopefully you're happy with. And if you're not happy with it, then you have a community of people that all can help you figure out what the right amount is. So for instance, in blockchain, when one blockchain gets hacked, someone says, I'm holding on to all of this cryptocurrency, and the community can come together and actually say, nope, we're going to revert back to the block before you hacked it because we don't believe that's fair. And so I think that there's this mechanism of self-correcting in the community where if I actually can state my case for the value that I provided, in the long run, I will get paid back for it. Now that's abstract in the sense of your question, like where does this actually trigger? Where do I actually know I'm going to be able to get money back out of it? Where there are things that you'll literally be able to point to. So for instance, if I have a track record, so Farouk has a track record of putting out NFTs. Those NFTs have value because they provide access. If Farouk sees someone exchange their time and energy to add value to Rug Radio, then maybe he gives them access to something that other people have deemed to have value, like monetary value. That's a direct exchange that's going on there. Maybe the exchange actually is not tied to cryptocurrency. It's just tied to validation, because there's a lot within social capital that is meaningful for people. It doesn't need to translate into some specific type of cryptocurrency. So shouting them out publicly or providing them access to you, like unfettered access, maybe having a conversation with them, learning with them, allowing them to ask questions, hosting a show and bringing them on. Maybe it's actually going out of your way to help them with something that they're doing, putting in your own time. I think that there will be mechanisms that are able to reward people better and better, like more and more accurately as time goes on. The best mechanisms that we have today are probably the backwards grant, which is when someone does something and then you publicly award them some type of money or validation for the work that they've done. Of course, we've seen all types of examples of that. Recently, Compound got hacked, and all of these different people took a ton of the currency. And one of the founders said, look, if you give us back the currency, we'll let you keep 10% of it just for that positive good that you're doing, that interaction that you're doing. And so in a way, that's actually payment for giving value back. I think that there are going to be all these different ways that I'm really excited for the future of being able to quantify this amount of capital that people are giving, whether that's social or otherwise, because now that everything is on chain, we're going to see different people take that data, or if it's not on chain in the metadata, we're going to see different people take all of that and rank it in different ways and quantify it in different ways and run different analytic systems. And all of a sudden, you're going to be able to actually say, that person, Jess, they have an incredible reputation because look at how all of their posts do on Twitter. Look at how the words that are being used to talk about them are really positive. Look at how they've been early and diamond handed in 20 different projects. And then you'll be able to leverage that once there's actually something that quantifies what reputation is into anything that uses that quantifier. And I think that that's the future we're headed into. So I think that a lot of people think that's the future we're headed into, where I'm not really sure how people are going to be rewarded exactly for the exchange of that value that they're providing. But I am sure we're going to have so many things that assist in that. And that right now, it's really just the community's bond. And it's that everything happens open in the public, and that your social capital is at risk and your reputation is at risk if you don't provide that value correctly. And that's what's keeping us afloat.
Yeah, I feel like there's this sort of legitimacy that anybody who's leading a community or a DAO is consciously working towards maintaining or growing. And I think that's sort of like the longevity of these projects come from thoughtful expansion of legitimacy. And that's probably like the core incentive mechanism here that will, align these projects. It's still very awkward, the sort of transition between social capital and financial capital. And where that really hits the road is like, who's actually going to go do the work and take responsibility and move things forward. And so we're seeing like core teams take that role. And I think that's kind of like probably the core team at Bored Ape Yacht Club takes on that. But the ones that really thrive are ones that are able to expand that economic opportunity to others who are willing to step up and take that ownership, while I think still maintaining like this air of, there's a big difference between somebody who's like, I'm doing this as their job, and somebody who's a very excited member of the community. And yet both want to feel like they're being rewarded in their own ways.
Yeah, what's funny is that we're at a time period now where none of those tools exist. And so, like, in terms of what you're saying, does the core team take it? Does the community take it? Who knows? There aren't very good mechanisms for governance right now within DAOs that actually break up work, that break up responsibility, that allocate reputation appropriately, or that quantify how much someone deserves appropriately. And so there's a lot of downside risk, but there's also a tremendous amount of upside, because within that inefficiency, I can be rewarded for something a lot more than what I might think I deserve, or what everyone else might think I deserve, as long as the people that are actually giving that, are the ones that are providing that value to me.
Not only is there this sort of like a potential variation or upside opportunity, so much of us, because we're all trying to figure this out right now, the default needs to be more generous. And the default needs to be towards creating more opportunity. I think that alpha gets figured out in the future as soon as like I'm able to quantify the exact value that you're able to bring to my community, and then there's a bidding war for it. Probably looks a lot more like maybe Google AdWords is a good example. Early on, if you had a lot of insight, you could buy those ads. But today it's like, gamed out by AI all the time. And so good luck finding any alpha in those keywords.
No, exactly. So it's in this. So I think that's like, there's so much upside because of the amount of wealth that there is in this space for me providing work. The odds are I'm going to get compensated way better than I would outside of this space for the work that I'm providing. And so that risk of not knowing exactly the mechanisms that can determine precisely how much I'm valued at, there's actually a lot more upside than there is downside. And I think that's a cleaner way to put it.
I think that's what's driving so much of the experimentation in the space. That'll end the fact that you can be involved in multiple different things at the same time. And so you're not actually required to take this sort of very old world bet that, we're going to look back on this phase of, say, the last 50 years of we're like, working for a company and getting paid by a company and being at the whim of a company and a boss. It's just going to look so archaic in a very similar way to us looking back at like the feudal ages of serfdom and sharecrop farmers, etc. It just is crazy. And I think like the flexibility, the opportunity that exists in this Web3 world will just make it so just look patently absurd.
Yeah, I think that this something I say a lot is that the age of the lurker is dead because in the traditional Web 2 world, I don't get paid for my ideas. I don't get paid for my contributions. I don't get paid for that Reddit comment that got 10,000 upvotes. But in this new world, in Web 3, actually, I can get paid for all those things. I can get paid for my contributions. I can write an article on mirror.xyz. And even after it's written, the people that appreciated it can give me thousands and thousands of dollars. And we see that today, and so that's really the most exciting thing possible for people that are willing to work hard. And there's endless possibilities there.
So I'm curious. I think we talk a lot in generalities here, and I love this conversation because it sort of, for me at least, it's a sort of a follow-on to a previous conversation we've had around just like the extreme value that community managers and people who are diving in and leading these communities can create. I'm curious from like a individual who is sitting on the sideline today, or maybe is a lurker and wants to sort of begin to take action and participate in some of these communities and participate in some of the value that's created here. What is that 0 to 1 moment? How do we get more people into high leverage value creation in Web3 communities?
Just watch it happen. Like, don't, I feel like Bruno Mars, don't believe me, just watch. Just go into these Discord groups, go into Twitter, see someone do work for nothing with no expectations, and then be rewarded for it. Like, wait, that person just spent 5 hours helping them manage their Discord and they gave them a token worth $3,000? That's insane. But it happens every single day. And the more you actually go in there and you watch, the more you'll understand the opportunities for you to then put in the work, provide that value. I was talking to someone recently who said they went into a Discord and they got into a conversation, and that person on the other end that they didn't know any information about was so inquisitive and was so caring. They were blown away. Now, of course, that person on the other end wanted to understand how this person that they were talking to could potentially be helpful. And that starts with educating them. It starts with being interested in who you are. And that is just amazingly genuine. And from there, my friend, who once they told them their passions and interests, was asked to write an article. And they just got paid for that article. And this is a financial protocol. It's a top 100 coin on CoinGecko.com. They went into the Discord. They talked to one of the people on the team. They wrote an article, and they got paid for it. And they're still in disbelief. They because it's really hard to imagine that this actually happens on a daily basis. But go into those Discords, go into those Twitters, be open to asking people questions, and be surprised when they respond and they ask you a question. And all of a sudden now you're making friends and you feel like you're a part of this community. And take that time, take 3 months, take 6 months just to do that, just to follow your curiosities into all the different groups in this new Web3 space that catch your eye, that interest you. There are people doing all different types of things, and start conversations and see how other people are adding value and see how they get rewarded for it. And I promise you, once you go through that process, you're going to dive headfirst.
What's your sense of like the importance of building reputation within these communities? So the idea of watching, I think, is wonderful because I think you're right. You will start to see good actions be rewarded, and sort of like the norms of the organization or the community will sort of become clear. I think a lot of people sit on the sidelines because they don't feel like they have either the reputation or the reach or the notoriety to be able to like raise their hand and be acknowledged for it. So I'm curious, is there reputation building that people should be doing, or is the next step beyond watching just like trying to jump in and create some value, or maybe those two things are the same?
Yeah, I think reputation is the output. I think it's the result of asking questions, of following your passions, of helping when you can. If you don't feel like you're a community member, try helping someone you do think is a community member, because that they will start to think of you as a community member because you just helped them. It's the easiest entry point. Go and help somebody. Be thoughtful around the interactions that you have, and either help someone out directly because there's something that you know that they don't, or provide information that you think is relevant to one person or to the whole space, or do a job that it needs to be done, and you'll see that you will be valued. And if you do these things consistently, that's how you build your reputation. And because we all work together in this community, reputation is like the most important thing. And you can leverage that into creating tremendous value for yourself. It takes a long time to build, but if there are community members that trust you, then you can actually really use that trust. And people expect you to use that trust.
Yeah, it's sort of like, I always say that DAOs are, there's two types of assets that DAOs need to sort of manage the allocation of. One is social capital and the other is financial capital. I think that happens on an individual basis as well. So reputation is super interesting there. I'm curious if we zoom out a little bit, we see a world, 6 months, a year, 5 years down the road. I think we're probably on the same page where we see there being a number of very valuable, powerful, authoritative communities out there that are doing things that'll just blow people's minds, probably things that are even today's brands and companies can't even imagine doing. I'm curious how you see that landscape of evolving from like a cooperation standpoint. How do we maintain this sort of cooperative building vibe that is so powerful today as we sort of grow and expand and bring the rest of the world into this space?
Yeah. Well, the one thing that we have going for us is that it happens without us thinking about it because of the transparency of the blockchain. And one example of that is how few mergers and acquisitions there are in this space. There aren't companies buying other companies. If a company provides value in this space, another company will just more or less utilize that company, right? And that's something really interesting where I'm not trying to hoard. Actually, I can't hoard. It's out there in the open. And why would I make it myself if there's another company doing it? So immediately in this space, you can see it happen every day. Companies are using other companies, and there's this symbiotic relationship. And that then filters up into the people and the communities.
I think that's a great point. And I think we again, I love the perspective you're taking on here, because I think there's, you are a very optimistic, positive human being, which I love about you so much. And I think often that can be misconstrued as like somebody who isn't a realist or doesn't realize the challenges that sort of exist. I think your point here is basically like, hey, this is so new. And so much of the stuff hasn't been figured out. And, what you were just saying there around these sort of partnerships and lack of mergers. And we don't have even we've seen very limited use of token swaps, and we've seen very limited use of even, the data that will make it clear how the communities are creating value between each other. Like, I know there's a ton of overlap between C Club and Forefront and Friends with Benefits, and yet I have really no understanding of what that looks like on a practical basis. There's no tangible example of that beyond sort of the feeling and the conversations, etc. And I think as soon as we start to make both those things a lot more clear, it's going to add even more fuel onto this sort of the power of cooperation. These communities are all made up of human beings, obviously, as we've sort of dove into quite a bit at length here today. How do you see sort of like the relationships between, like, are the relationships between DAOs or between these communities going to be more formalized? Some people are talking about the idea of there being like ambassadors for different projects, or I'm very curious about the sort of the social interaction that might be like the sinew that ties a lot of these communities together.
Yeah, it can go off in so many different directions from where we have it now. I'll tell you that what's going to definitely happen is that these groups and communities are going to get a lot better at understanding the role that they play in the broader ecosystem. And by better, I mean more focused, because you're going to have more people come in that have a very focused idea of how they can actually provide a service to the broader ecosystem or to a very specific niche, and they're going to execute on that. And then they're going to build reputation by their ability to execute. And then they're going to build their base of supporters, and they're going to build their total value locked by their ability to actually perform that again and again and again. And that takes communication, and it takes consistency, and it takes a high level of skill. And so you're going to see a future world where we have a lot of these incredible groups at very, very specific tasks. And they're also going to be fantastic at transparently communicating what they're doing, because it's sort of like it's cutthroat in the sense that you're up against people that are going to continually improve their offering. And if you don't continually improve your offering, someone else is just going to take your place that's just providing a better service. And that's positive for the whole ecosystem. And then our roles in terms of communication within companies gets a lot more clearer, because, oh, I know exactly where I slot in because this is the focus that I provide. And that's on the company level. On the individual level, I think that we're seeing two different groups of people. Well, there are a lot of different groups, but if I had to separate it into two different camps, it would be the crypto native people and then the general consumer that's coming into the space. And the crypto native person might have a ton of different interests because their interest lies in the underlying technology, and their interest lies in creating community and creating this foundation that the next billion people can come into. And the interest of the general public that's coming in is probably going to be more one-dimensional. I came in because my favorite company came in, and that's what I'm doing here. And so they're probably going to have very different social roles for both of those groups, where one is going to be sort of trying to hop in and out of many different fields and sort of trying to create different businesses around many different fields and how they interact. And then one is going to be just creating for within the community that they joined up with.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a dynamic landscape of, it should be really interesting to see how we find our place in it. I think there's going to be ways of adoption as well, and understanding of how some of us are probably better at playing across multiple different communities, while others will be hooked in and maybe want to lean into one or only a few.
But look, this landscape is so variable. We don't know in 10 years if there's going to be 3 billion people that all live within one open world. We don't know if there are going to be many operating systems, and some of them have a very specific aesthetic, and some of them have a very specific distribution method, and some of them value different personalities. Some of them value different skill sets, where it's like completely unknown. But what I can tell you is that the difference in this traditional world, in the world we're building, is that you have ownership, you have this unique participation. And because of those two things, like, I actually own what I have. It's on the blockchain. It's in my wallet. I actually can participate with other people without someone coming in between us. And then I have access to all these incredible tools that everyone else has access to. We're going to build something that looks completely different than our current reality. And, that's what I would call the metaverse, sort of that different set of inputs. I don't know how it's going to look. I don't know how it's going to feel. I don't know how people are going to interact between each other.
Yeah, I think even asking that question is slightly unfair, because right now we're still in this phase of emulating what has worked in the past. And, I think this idea of like, what does the Web3 social network look like? And I think, my intuition at least is that it probably doesn't look at all like a social network in a traditional sense. And so we need to kind of like get this dirty hose water out of the hose that's just, backed up from the previous way of doing everything to see whatever this new potential is, these new ways that we're going to come together. And I share that optimism as you do, that it'll be interesting and hopefully more fair, accessible, fun, all those things. We're just coming up on the hour, and I think you're talking about tools in the last sort of explanation there. Like these amazing tools that we all have access to today.
We all have a bank. We all have a bank in our Chrome extension. We have a literal bank. I mean, it's absolutely insane. We all can lend and borrow against our fungible assets, our and we're going to be able to do that against our non-fungible assets. And you can do it if you have $1, and you can do it if you have $10 billion. And that is just so special.
I think it's so easy to overlook the power of this bank account and even like the ability to sort of create digital cap tables and the exchange and ownership that can happen through that. Where I was going with that question though, like from where you sit today, like is there a tool that you just wish existed that would just sort of like propel us into this next phase? Or like what is the pain that you're facing that would unlock that next level of value?
I think we've already touched on it actually. I would love to see people start trying to quantify reputation, because that's how we actually allow for anyone on the planet to access and benefit financially, even if they don't have finances. Because with your reputation, it's sort of like, in the traditional world, we have a credit score, and you can use that credit score on different things. Well, that credit score is based on, paying your bills on time, but it's not based on how you act and with your friends, how much value you create at your job, how much value you create for your community. All of those things will be quantified. I mean, I think it's important to understand that with blockchain, everything's out there in the open. And so people are going to come in and make with that data whatever they want. And it's going to be able to value people in different ways. So if I'm someone who's a trader, then look at the last 5 years of my trading and rank me against everyone else. And if I've done the best of everyone else, then wouldn't most people give me money, right? And then I can start a successful business based on that. And that's sort of the reputation I'm talking about. Now, that's a very clear-cut example of someone being a trader, but that'll happen in any walk of life, in any situation. If I'm a gamer and I'm just the best gamer, then shouldn't I get my games for free? Shouldn't I get the best items to test out? And the methods of recording that information today are not so great. And, it's also not really transparent. But in the future, you're going to be able to actually start to leverage who you are and the positive actions that you've taken, or by the way, the negative actions. And, someone who's scammed a bunch of people, it's going to be known that they've scammed a bunch of people. So I would like to see tools that start to actually create sort of scores for things that aren't directly related to money. And for instance, if I have been good for the ecosystem, if I'm a positive contributor consistently, and I only have $1, maybe a decentralized bank would let me take out $3 because I'm using that incredible reputation as collateral, as opposed to using more money as collateral, because reputation is really important, and that's a future that I think is going to completely transform the planet. Absolutely. And that's something I'd like to see. And then, of course, a social network, a Web3 social network like we were talking about. What the heck does that even look like? I don't know. But something that actually rewards people that are early to trends, something that rewards people for novel ideas, something that rewards people for gathering other people together. It's really just breaking down all those things that help a company grow, that help a community grow. And once you break them down, then you can be rewarded for them. Once they're on the blockchain, then no one like Instagram or Facebook can say, actually, it's our platforms that are the reason that this is valuable. It's not that all these incredible artists are coming on Instagram and posting these amazing photos, and that's why Instagram's the right place to be. And maybe it's a little bit of both, but it's certainly not 100% Instagram. The artist gets nothing. In this new environment, that's never going to be the case. If you positively contribute, you should be rewarded for it, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's your reputation. Those are the tools I'd like to see in the future.
A world where people creating value get ownership in the value they're creating is something that I want to be a part of. And we're lucky to have other folks like you advocating for that and pushing at the edges. So, Ohhshiny, I very much appreciate you coming on today with us to share your view of the world. I'm sure this won't be our last conversation. In our last sort of minute here, where should we point people to? Where can they find you? How do they get in touch?
No, I look, Jess, I appreciate you and all the things that you're doing. And if I could just touch on one more point also, for the last idea, this power that people are starting to have means that coming together in large numbers, you really can get anything done. I think about companies like PartyBid, where if you have $1, you actually might be able to participate in purchasing something and owning something that's so far out of your reach in the traditional world because 10,000 other people also put $1 or $5 or $1 million, and everyone gets a little piece depending on how much they've spent. And it's just so beautiful to think of how equitable that world is. I talk about these things all the time. I talk about the community, I talk about NFTs and what's going on, and I always try to bring the positive vibes on my morning show, Monday to Friday, the Ohhshiny show at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So anyone can catch me on there. They can catch me on Twitter at AxieKing, AXIEKING. They can catch me on Discord. I only have about 200 that I try to check like a maniac every few days and prune, and then too many get added, and all of a sudden I'm back to checking 200 again. Feel free to hop into my DMs and send me a message. Sometimes I get a lot of them, but I try to go through them. And I'm really excited to have you in this space and to see you building and adding value where you can. And I can't wait to give you value back for it.
I love it. Appreciate you, man. We'll talk to you soon.